So I'm still very much in recovery, 14 vertebrae fused. So anyways, but that's the boring stuff. So let's get to the fun stuff. Let me start off by asking a couple quick questions. How many of you have children that have been diagnosed with any sort of mental health disorder? ADHD, any autism, bipolar? Nieces? Okay, any family members in your family? Okay, all right. Now for those of you that have your hands raised, thinking of who you're thinking of, how many of those kids take medication for their disorders? Okay, a couple. All right, a couple. We have any clinicians in here? Right, okay, good. Do you have any patients who have mental health disorders who take medication? Absolutely, right? Okay, for those of you that raised your hand, either know somebody or have patients who take medications for a mental health disorder, have you ever wondered if they're really working or what the long-term side effects of those medications might be? Absolutely. I mean, I see heads bobbing up and down. That's a reality. I'm going to start off today. I want to read to you an article from a mommy blogger. That's what she actually called herself, as a mommy blogger. And her story really resonated with me because of what my family's been through and what I'm going to share with you today. So before I tell the story, I want everybody to put down all their pens and their phones and anything they've got. And I just want you, while I read the story, to close your eyes. And I want you to envision yourself as the author of what I'm going to read. Okay? So everybody close your eyes. Bear with me. One of my favorite contemporary Christian bands is Mercy Me. They have a recent hit titled Dear Younger Me, where they tell us how wonderful it would be if our older self could give our younger self advice. Sort of warn them, if you will. If that were possible, here's what my letter would look like. Dear younger self, brace yourself. You will have to decide whether or not to medicate your children with some very powerful drugs at a very young age. It will be one of the toughest decisions you will ever make as a parent. It will rip your insides to shreds and make you contemplate whether or not you're fit to be a parent at all. As your older self, I know you. You're probably literally laughing out loud right now. You're probably contemplating wadding up this letter and throwing it in the garbage can. You're probably thinking, I am never going to medicate my babies. But you will. The decision on whether or not to medicate your children will be agonizing. There are so many moving parts that will factor into your decision. It will seem like doctors are very quick to medicate, and many are making mental health diagnosis without any testing or very little evaluation. In the future, it will seem like every child on the planet has ADHD. You will answer a few questions on a piece of paper, and whammo, your kid has ADHD and is put on a class 2 stimulant, mind-altering medication. Some of this may have to do with your insurance company. Because your boys will be adopted as a sibling group, they will have Medicaid until they're 18 years old. Do not accept this insurance. Add your children to your husband's insurance immediately. Fight to get them the best care possible. The best doctors, the best psychiatrists, the best therapists. Encourage other mental health moms to do the same. Cut cable, get a night job, do whatever it takes to make it happen. When you do your homework, researching to find the right doctors, demanding thorough testing before diagnosis, asking a million questions, and then asking a million more questions, you will decide the benefits of medicating outweigh the risks. But your internal struggle will not end with that decision. You will need to prepare yourself for something difficult to embrace, your new normal. A new normal will be ever evolving when you decide to medicate. The first time you see your 6-year-old son walking around like a zombie because he's over-medicated, your heart will simply break. Sometimes the medication doses will change as the kids grow older. Sometimes you have to add new medications that sound very scary, like antipsychotic medications, psychotropic medications, mood stabilizers, and more. Sometimes you'll have to switch medications and start the process all over again. For example, When your oldest son, who's 10 years old, his psychiatrist will insist he take a test online asking him a variety of questions about his bipolar mood disorder. This will be required by your insurance company. During that test, he will lean over to you and ask you about a question, wanting to know if his sexual activity has been higher or lower since starting the medication. What is sexual activity, Mom? You will be asked. It will enrage you. It will absolutely light your insides on fire that this is how your son is exposed to the concept of sex. You will want to shout from the highest mountain, why is my 10-year-old son required to take a test that asks him about his sexual activity? Are you kidding me? You will ask a psychiatrist if this is really necessary. And she will say, unfortunately, yes it is. While infuriating, you must accept this as part of the process. You don't have to like it, but it is what is required to help your son. It is what is required for your son to function in his everyday life. Despite your initial reaction, you must embrace this as a part of your new normal. You will analyze, you will second guess, and you will probably regret every decision you make regarding medicating. Every single day, you will feel a pit in your stomach, worrying to death about what the long-term effects of the medication will be. Will your children suffer as adults as a result of the choices you made for them as a child? You will pray harder than you have ever prayed in your life. If you remember nothing else, younger self, remember this. Trust yourself. Make the best decision with the information you have at the time. And if you get new information and decide to change your decision, force yourself not to feel any regret or any guilt over the previous decision, because you made the best decision you could as a parent with the information you had at the time. You're stronger than you think. Allow yourself some grace, please. Love your older self. Spoiler alert, guess who wrote the article? I sure did. I wrote this article back in July of 2013 when I was a mom, like many of you who raised your hands, who was just, grappling with that gut-wrenching decision on whether or not to medicate my two boys. Fast forward 6 years to today, to this time, to this place. And I don't feel like the mom that wrote that article anymore. It's almost like I'm a different person now. And I'm here to share why. Allow me to explain. From almost the instant that we started medicating our boys, one was bipolar and one was diagnosed ADHD, almost instantly, it just didn't feel right. It didn't feel right in my mommy gut. Who knows about the mommy gut, right? That instinct. I always felt like, my husband and I always felt like we were missing a piece of the puzzle. I would lay awake at night and this nagging voice would be inside my head, constantly telling me something isn't right. I should not accept the status quo, right? All the puzzle pieces are not fitting together. 6 years later, I now know that nagging voice was the voice of God. Proverbs 3:5-6 says, trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways submit to him, and he will make your paths straight. So that's what I did. Many crying sessions, many nights, literally on my knees praying, begging for this uneasiness to go away, this sense of something is not right. So I gave all my uneasiness to God, and he made my path straight. And believe it or not, God's path, God's voice, led me straight to the Dr. Phil show. Did she just say the Dr. Phil show? Yes, I said the Dr. Phil show. Is anybody watching Dr. Phil? You can admit, nobody's filming you. Okay. Guilty pleasure, I've watched it my whole life. I love that little ball band, okay? But there is a doctor on the show, you may have heard of him. His name is Dr. Lawless. Older gentleman, white hair. He also sits on the Dr. Phil advisory board. Okay, well, Dr. Lawless founded the PNP Center in Dallas, which stands for Psychoneuroplasticity Center, Okay, it looks like a few of you are familiar with that. He's always on the show, and he's running specialized testing on kiddos who seem to have like the most extreme of extreme behaviors, right? Really struggling and not responding to their current plans of treatment, typically on some sort of cocktail of drugs. Most of the ones that he deals with are. But the kids on the show would go see Dr. Lawless at this PMP center, and it's like magic. Poof. The follow-up video shows that the kids improve significantly after Dr. Lawless works with them. And he almost always caught something that the other doctors didn't catch, right? And he would adjust the kiddo's treatment plan accordingly. Well, I thought to myself, I bet you no average Joe off the street gets into the PMP center, right? Like you gotta be in Dr. Phil's gang, right? You gotta be part of his group in order to get in. But Luke 21:19 says, stand firm and you will win life, okay? So that's what I did. I stood firm to get into that center. And let me tell you, it is no easy task. Mounds of paperwork, mounds of interviews. First, we were rejected because my son was experiencing some psychosis, and they don't take anybody that has had any break from reality because it skews the testing. So I had to have a 3-hour conversation with 9 doctors, my best-selling skills ever, to get in. But you stand firm and you will win life. So we went to the PMP Center. And what we did there was we went through 2 days worth of assessments on each child. And when I say 2 days, I mean 2 full days, starting at 8, ending at 5. Certainly breaks along the way. But full days of testing. And I want to share with you, I'm not going to go into like all the big words, but I want to share with you the type of testing that was done in this 2 days, because it will play into bigger part of the story later on. So the first thing that they did during this 2-day assessment procedure is something called a QEEG, or a brain map. Anybody heard of a QEEG brain map? Okay, good. What it does is it maps the electrical activity in the brain. It helps sort out different brainwave patterns so that you can determine strengths and challenges and relate those findings to how you think and how you process information and how you behave. Now, I want everybody, if you got some paper to take notes on, I want you to go to a clean piece of paper, and on the top, I want you to write brain mapping. And then I want you to leave that page blank for right now. We're going to go back to it. I want you to write brain mapping. While you're doing that, I'll tell you about the rest of the tests. Certainly there were medical tests that tested all sorts of physical functioning as it relates to cognitive functioning. They tested for toxins. There were metabolic tests. They looked for hormonal problems, dietary balance, food sensitivities, sleep concerns, exercise habits, and craniosacral balance. I mean, the gamut, right? The whole gamut, the whole enchilada. There was also some psychophysiological assessments, or the PPA, many of you are probably familiar with, which is a way of measuring the way that the body responds to stress and relaxation, like what the response patterns look like. Don't fall asleep, I promise it's all going to make sense in a minute. There are psychological and neuropsychological tests, which test for intellectual, educational, personality, strengths, weaknesses. I mean, these tests are about as thorough as it gets. They also interview the kids and the parents and every member of the family that you bring with you to the PMP Center, because they want a picture of how you're functioning as a family unit. There's behavioral vision screening to determine how the eyes are tracking and teaming and accommodating, and all kinds of other assessments. The key is that at this center, the testing is fluid. And what I mean by that is all of the doctors that conduct all of these tests are in one building. They're in one location. So doctors who can understand every part of the brain and how it functions are in one spot, right? So during the testing, they're able to come and say, you know what? We just found this. So we're going to redirect the direction we go with the rest of the tests. Or we thought we were going to do this test initially, but based on what we just saw, now we're going to do this test. Where else do you have all of the doctors of that discipline that can help that child in one building at one time conducting fluid assessments as opposed to a questionnaire?
Exactly. Couldn't have said it better myself. Can I get an amen for that? That's it. Okay. So during those tests, it turned out that the brain mapping that we did, and we're going to go into a lot of detail, you wrote that on a blank piece of paper, right? Okay. The brain mapping showed that my son who had been diagnosed with ADHD, guess what? No ADHD. Instead, he had some visual processing issues, which is treatable with behavioral vision therapy, non-invasive, no medication needed. And he was riddled with crippling anxiety, like the President of the United States is not carrying around the level of anxiety that this little kid was on his shoulders. It also turned out that my older son, who had been diagnosed with bipolar disorder, not bipolar, bingo. Rather, what was going on with him is he was having small, what they call epileptiform seizures. So not like, flailing, not that, blips. Like, he didn't know he was having them. As simple as you blinking your eyes, right? Subconscious, you don't even know what's happening. But this poor 10-year-old was non-stop having these seizures. Blip, blip, blip. The problem is, every time he had a seizure, it's kind of like a reset in your brain. So Adam, my son, can just be doing anything, and all of a sudden, I'm mad. All of a sudden, I'm happy. All of a sudden, I forgot what you just said. All of a sudden, where am I? And those symptoms very much mimic the symptoms of bipolar disorder. So it must be bipolar, so let's put him on a narcotic. Both of my boys misdiagnosed. Both of my boys wrongfully medicated. I wish I could tell you that my story is unique. But my family is not alone on this island of misdiagnosis. I titled this presentation 911 Minors on Meds because we have a dire emergency in our country. Too many children are being misdiagnosed and wrongfully medicated. It's almost like ADHD, bipolar, autism. These have become buzzwords. Yes. But am I right? Yes, they have become buzzwords. We hear them all the time. It's just simply become our norm. Okay? It's just our norm. We know if we don't have people in our direct family, we have people in our practice. We have neighbors. We have people at church. We have people on the Suns baseball team, right? It's become the norm. Everybody knows a kid that's been diagnosed with mental health disorder. Now, let me give you a disclaimer before we go any further. I am not here to say that Western medicine is bad, okay? I am not. In capital letters, I'm not here to say that. And I'm not here to say that there aren't kids who legitimately have ADHD, right? Or who are bipolar, okay? Or who are autistic. What I'm saying is that not enough is being done up front to diagnose properly, okay? Amen. That's what I'm saying, okay? So make sure we draw that line, all right? Especially after spine surgery. I'm kind of a big fan of Western medicine. Like the muscle relaxer. Okay. I digress. Don't say that. Don't film that. All right. So what I'm saying really is just that not enough non-invasive testing and treatment methods are being tried before these drugs are prescribed. And really, it's just the current criteria. It's just not enough. And it's not okay. And it's okay that we stand up and say it's not okay. Now, if you suspect, for those of you that haven't gone through it, if you suspect that your child has ADHD, let's say a teacher sends you a note, right, this happens a lot, kid's kind of hyper, can't get them to settle down, you might want to check for ADHD. You go to a psychiatrist, you fill out a questionnaire, about 15, 20 questions. They send a questionnaire to his teachers, 3 or 4 questions. They spend 15 minutes observing your child because psychiatrists typically book in 15-minute increments. And after one meeting, looking over the questionnaire, boom, that's it. That's the whole evaluation process to put a 5 or 6 or 7-year-old on these medications, okay? Now, certainly, not every psychiatrist is the same, not every testing method is the same, but that's what I went through. That's what I experienced. I was able to drink the Kool-Aid because my boys were adopted. And through the adoption process, we adopted through CPS. They're biological brothers, but we adopted through CPS. we were warned that there were quite a few mental health disorders in the biological family's history. So when it came to us and we heard ADHD and bipolar, those were words we'd heard before, right? That mom and dad had. So it was easy for us to accept the testing and the diagnosis, okay? But it just wasn't thorough enough. It just wasn't thorough enough. Pharmaceutical companies, who I like to call big pharma, they are hitting us with such aggressive direct-to-consumer marketing campaigns that boost the recognition of the drugs, right? And they advertise them as pharmaceutical therapy for so many conditions that minors have, right? Inattention, hyperactivity, so many things that minors have. So when you are seeing that over and over and over again, and then you go to the psychiatrist and they say, I think it's ADHD, and you need to put on medication, you go, oh, okay, well, that's the answer, because that's what I've sort of been conditioned to understand, right?
Yes.
But I think when this happens, when big pharma talks, our mommy guts walk.
Yeah.
When big pharma talks, our mommy guts walk. Because that's the way we were raised, to listen to the doctor, right? And if one doctor sends you to another doctor, and you're like, okay, now I'm going to a specialist. This is a good thing. This doctor really knows what's going on, right? And we're trained to listen to doctors our whole entire life. And I'm not dissing doctors. I love doctors. God bless what they do. But in this arena, I think that when big pharma talks, our mommy guts walk. And I want to rile up our mommy guts today with you. It makes me think of that song, Somebody Call 911, that dance song, y'all know that? Am I really? Am I just, should I just put the mic down now? Just say thank you and good night? Okay, so y'all gonna sing that for me. You know that song? Ready? Somebody call 911. Yeah, we're gonna hold choir practice immediately following this announcement. But there is a funny dance song. It's called Somebody Call 911. But I'm laughing, and we're all laughing at that song because that was obviously a good note to self. Don't do that next time. But you probably should call Mama Bear. You probably should call my Mama Bears out there. You should call 911 because this Mama Bear is on fire. I really am. This Mama Bear is on fire. Now, I could bore you with scary statistics, which wouldn't be very nice at 9 in the morning. I could literally spend the whole hour that I've been allotted reading one horrifying statistic after another about misdiagnosis and overdiagnosis of minors, but I'll spare you. Okay, nobody's going to go to sleep on my watch. All right, I'll spare you this morning. I'm just going to give you one example, and this happens to fall under the ADHD arena. And I keep going back to using ADHD as an example. First of all, because it's one that my son was misdiagnosed with, but also I think it's one of the most common mental health disorders that kids are misdiagnosed with. So this statistic is according to Harvard Medical, okay? Now, I certainly didn't go there, but I heard that's a good school. All right, so according to Harvard Medical, ADHD is overdiagnosed. In the U.S., more than 1 in 10 kids have been diagnosed with ADHD, and more than 3.5 million are taking drugs to curb their symptoms. Kids are being tested and diagnosed as young as preschool. It is getting scary. ADHD is now as prevalent as the common cold. Guys, that's from Harvard Medical. That's not from Don Kuhn. That's from Harvard Medical. There are many things that have similar symptoms and are often misdiagnosed as ADHD. A few examples, and these are just a few. Again, time is limited, just a few. One is auditory and visual processing issues. Okay, now, here's a great example of my saying that you mentioned in my intro, and about, I didn't know what I didn't know, going through this process. Didn't know what I didn't know. Do y'all know that auditory and visual processing is different than hearing and seeing?
Yep. I know that.
Okay, I saw a couple wows. It is. For example, visual processing. You go to the eye doctor, right? They put the eye chart in the back. You read the rows. They determine your prescription. You leave with nice contacts or glasses, right? Right. Okay. Hearing, you listen for the beeps, right? They determine whether or not you need some sort of hearing aid. That's what they do in the schools. That's what you do when you go to the doctor. So if they say your son has 20/20 vision or your son has great hearing, you're like, wahoo, I am all set, right? Wrong. There's a whole other side of it. Visual and auditory processing. And what that means is, as a kid or an adult, once I see those letters on the eye chart across the room, how do I process what letter that is? And it actually touches every part of the brain. Data packets are actually passed through every part of the brain to process that information, or to hear that information if we're talking auditory. Okay, so my son, who was misdiagnosed with ADHD, was dropping packets between every part of the brain. Very often misdiagnosed. Very often. Another thing I didn't know, what I didn't know, see if y'all know this one. Have you ever heard of primitive reflexes? Yep. Girl, me neither. Like, why haven't I heard of this? Okay, why haven't I? I mean, seriously, this is not right. Let me tell you what these are. Primitive reflexes, and I talk in mommy talk, I don't know all the big words, but y'all can Google the big words later. Primitive reflexes are reflexes in an infant that typically integrate in the womb or shortly after birth. It gives them all of their strength and conditioning and mobility and flexibility and those sorts of things. Okay, I never heard of this. My pediatrician, no one ever said the word primitive reflexes to me until I went through this. Well, it turns out my son, who was misdiagnosed with ADHD, not one of his primitive reflexes integrate.
Oh, that's bad.
There's one called a spinal gallant reflex, and what that does, and I'm not going to say because I won't be able to get back up, but what happens if your spinal gallant reflex does not integrate, when you sit, it literally hurts. Okay? So you're constantly having to move because it hurts. Okay? But your kids are born with that. So do you think they know that that's not normal? That that's not how it's supposed to be? No, they don't know how to verbalize, well, when I sit like this, I have to squirm because it hurts. Because for them, it's always been that way. Well, what happens in school when a kid can't sit still? What happens? You're going to get a note saying they think your child has bingo. Anxiety, sleep disorders, learning disorders, PTSD. And guys, I got to tell you, sometimes just being a normal kid gets misdiagnosed as ADHD. We live in this electronic world, this technology world. These kids are not getting out. They're not running. They're not exercising enough, right? And they're fidgety and anxious. And that gets misdiagnosed because of this, the type of, kids are growing up with all this technology. Okay, now, I told you earlier to get a blank piece of paper and write what at the top? Brain mapping. Oh, so good. Y'all listen way better than my kids. All right, so I want you to go to that because we're going to go a little deeper on the subject. Now, we received so much valuable information from that 2-day assessment I talked to you about in the PMP Center. But I have to tell you, the most bestest information that we received, hands down, in that assessment came from the brain mapping, from a test called the QEEG, quantitative EEG. Now, I'm going to explain brain mapping to you again in mommy terms. Just can't use the big words. So here's how I explain brain mapping. It's going to be funny, yeah, I know. All right, so you go in, you put on this thing that looks like a swim cap. And there's an example right over there on the beautiful Miss, what's her name? Lulu. Beautiful Miss Lulu. It looks like a swim cap. It's got little electrodes on it, okay? So you hooked up, little gel, gets in the hair, you wear it. It's hooked to a computer gizmo thing. And they ask you to do some things with your eyes open, some things with your eyes closed. It's not a very long test at all. And it records your brainwave activity. Now, from this test, you get a chunk of information, and there are samples of what the assessment looks like over there at the table too. And I'm going to talk about how wonderful sandstone is in just a second. You get this big chunk of information, because what the brain map shows is it shows how your brain is firing and functioning in every aspect. It looks looks at everything, okay? It gives you the answers on why you are the way that you are, why you behave the way that you behave, why you think the way that you think, why your brain is firing this way or that way or the other way, okay? It gives, it tells you what nutritional elements your brain is missing, right? Like for my kids, obviously they're missing enough omega-3s. I don't know any 10-year-olds that eat enough salmon, right? I mean, give me a break, seriously. So much information. I urge you to look through one of those reports. I tell parents that even if this is all you do, it gives you such an overview about how and why your child is behaving the way that they behave. In the good way and the not so good way, right? And it can even, that information can even just change the way that you parent.
Yeah.
You know, when you have a child with a mental health disorder, you go through that, well gosh, I don't know if I should issue consequences for that, because I don't know if you can control that or not. Right? Right? And if I punish him for something he can't control, what kind of mother am I? Right? So maybe I'll let him slide on that one. Well, you're gonna know after this assessment what he can and cannot control. So if he acts like he can't control something, but he really can, there you go. Now you and I gonna have a little chat. That's right. But you'll also find out what he can't control, right? And why, and how to fix it. Okay. So that's brain mapping in wrong terms. Now, let me ask you this. Knowing what you know so far about my story, would you be surprised to know that ADHD has a very specific brainwave pattern, and that the QEEG brain map was actually approved by the FDA as a diagnostic tool for ADHD? Would you be surprised to know that? Yes. Why? Why are you surprised? Because they don't use it. Because nobody talks about it. Nobody talks about it. I mean, where is the mind blown emoji when I need it, right? Where's that dang emoji? Poof, mind blown. They don't use it. Nobody talks about it. It's like ADHD has this brainwave pattern, so if your kid has this brainwave pattern, do they have ADHD? No. Simple. Not used. Now, why, you ask? Why do you think?
Money.
Cost. There you go. Insurance companies typically don't cover this type of testing. And like Pavlov's dog, if you will, you know, they've been trained to go where the money is, right? You gotta pay to play. And Big Pharma is gonna win that game every time. Every single time. As Ephesians 6:11 reminds us, put on the full armor of God, so that you can take your stand against the devil's schemes.
Yes.
I say it's time to armor up, my fellow armor bearers. We're in a fight of our lives to save our children's developing brains. This is it. This is the turning point. Now. This is the now. Now, fortunately for us, through that PMP Center in Dallas, they made a recommendation. And God led us to the amazing Dr. Agnes and her team at the Sandstone Center for Neurofeedback in the Woodlands. Dr. Agnes. Dr. Agnes is the one that goes over the reporting. Sweet Miss Lacey is the one that brain maps the kid. Sweet Miss Abby is the brains behind the whole operation. She's going to bring you. You can get your kids set up with neurofeedback. Now, in all honesty, I'm not here today to, I'm not peddling anything, okay? I'm not here to say, hey, you got to go do this, you got to do that. I'm just sharing my story. Because I know I didn't have to ask those questions in the beginning, because I know everyone in here knows someone that has a child somewhere that has a mental health disorder. And maybe it's properly diagnosed. Maybe it's not. Guess what? Both of my boys are drug-free now. Yes. Can I get an amen? They're drug-free because the brain map determined they were misdiagnosed. And we were able to do a non-invasive treatment called neurofeedback training, which I'm going to talk a little bit more about. This type of training is used for ADHD ADHD, depression, anxiety, traumatic brain injuries, generalized mood disorders, learning disorders, insomnia, migraines, seizures. Remember, kid with the seizures? Yep. Chronic pain. Might need a few sessions. PTSD, addiction, more. The list goes on and on and on. Would you be surprised to know that this type of non-invasive, no drug involved treatment has been around for over 4 decades?
Wow.
It has been proven to be as effective as Ritalin in the treatment of ADHD. So let me ask one more time. Why aren't more doctors recommending neurofeedback? Why? Cost. Insurance companies typically don't cover this type of non-invasive treatment, which doesn't mean wonderful places like Sandstone won't work with you on that. But they typically don't cover it. They're training doctors through kickbacks. And the general public through aggressive advertising. And we all think that the drugs are the way to go. Sometimes yes. Sometimes yes. Medications are the way to go. Absolutely. Again, I'm not here to, bash Western medicine. But sometimes, no, they're not the way to go. And when we're dealing with a child whose brain is still developing, don't we want to know that we have the proper diagnosis before we do something like medicate them with psychotropic drugs? Yes, we do. As parents, don't we deserve and shouldn't we demand to know all the options that are available before we make a decision to medicate our kids? I didn't know what I didn't know. All the treatment my kids needed to become drug-free was within 8 miles of my house.
Wow.
So how do we make this happen? As a parent, this is the part where I'm trying not to cry. As a parent, I can never get back those 5 years that I fed my children those medications when they didn't need them. I felt like I was a drug dealer. I really did. They didn't have a say. Come here, Alex, time for medicine. Come here, Alex, time for medicine. Take some medicine. Go take some medicine. Go take some medicine. I felt like a drug dealer. That may sound harsh, but it's honestly how I felt. The mommy guilt has been absolutely, positively overwhelming for me. Good thing I'm a great therapist. Good thing I'm a great therapist. I actually see the therapist that also sees my boys. Oftentimes the right combination for helping kids involves talk therapy, right? It's not just medication. It's not just neurofeedback. It's not just a psychiatrist. It's not just talk therapy or play therapy. It's all of it. And that's why the PMP Center is so amazing, because they have it all under one house. And we don't see that anywhere else. Why not? Why not? If I have cancer, I can see all the doctors and the radiation specialists and the chemo people in one building. And they consult. But we're not consulting on our developing children's brains. Are you kidding me? Like this is a thing for real? Oh, no, soapbox too, I'm sorry. I can't get back whatever permanent damage the side effects have caused. I can't. I just can't. Just this week, you may have seen that a man was awarded $8 billion with a B dollars in a lawsuit against Johnson & Johnson. Plaintiffs claim that Johnson & Johnson failed to warn of the risk of development of enlarged breasts in males. It was associated with a drug called Risperdal, and one of the side effects is growing female breast tissue. So a man grew female-sized breasts, and they never went away. And he was awarded $8 billion for that, and for proving that the company marketed unapproved uses with children in their advertising. That was this week. My son was on Risperdal, among many other drugs, like lithium, Depakote. We're talking Mac Daddy drugs, right? Like this is no baby Tylenol, little aspirin, little grape flavored something in a syringe. This is big time drugs. His poor little body was constantly weaning off one med
and ramping up on another med because they weren't working. Why weren't they working? Because he was being treated for something he didn't need. So the side effects took over. One of them affected his liver. Another one weakened his kidney function forever. He's 14 now. 14. Forever. I have to live with that for the rest of my life. Even if I made the best decision with the information I had at the time, I still have to live with the decision to allow the doctors to convince me to drink that Kool-Aid. To convince me that the only way my kids would have any quality of life or be successful in society is if they were medicated. When it wasn't. I didn't question the testing methods or the diagnosis of ADHD or bipolar at the time, because to be honest, I was grateful for the label. I was grateful to have a diagnosis because I felt like I finally had answers. I felt like somebody understood. I felt like, okay, now I know what it is, so I can deal with that, right? We often say the fear of the unknown is the worst, right? That's when you're the most scared. So I'm not going to lie. Part of me was glad to have a label. I was glad to have the label. I was glad to have the answers, but they were the wrong answers. Now, if you listen to nothing else I've said today, listen to this. I implore you to trust your mommy gut, or your aunt gut, right? Or your therapist, the client gut. If any part of you feels like you're missing a piece of your child's mental health puzzle, follow your gut. John 14:26 says, "But the Helper, the Holy Spirit, whom the Father will send in my name, he will teach you all things and bring to your remembrance all that I have said to you." I waited longer than I should have to follow him. But I didn't know what I didn't know. Yes, these types of testing and treatment methods should be readily accessible and cost-effective for everyone. But they're not. They're not. And not necessarily because the type of treatment facilities like Sandstone don't exist. It's that you don't know you're supposed to be looking for them. If you go home today, and you can't do it now because you're listening patiently and attentively to me, you don't want to miss one word. But if you Google brain mapping near me, or neurofeedback near me, or QEEG testing near me, you are going to have a mic drop when you see how many centers there are in our area. But you didn't know you needed to find one, did you? No, you did not know that. Didn't know what you didn't know. Cost effective. I'm not going to lie. It's not cost effective for everyone. And I am mad as a hornet about that. Okay? My kids aren't any better than anybody else's kids. Okay? I shouldn't be able to have treatment for my kids because maybe I have a little bit more money in my savings account. That's not right. That's not fair, right? So we got to get the insurance companies on board. These tests should be required before doctors can prescribe narcotics and other mind-altering drugs to minors. To anybody, really, but especially minors. But they're not. They're not. And yes, the mental health community should be jumping up and down, spreading the good word everywhere about this type of comprehensive testing like brain mapping or behavioral vision, behavioral auditory processing, all of that stuff, but they're not. They're not. And yes, the lawmakers should be listening to the pioneers in the field of neuroscience. They should be sitting in PMP's office learning about how it should be instead of taking lunches and dinners with Big Pharma. Right? Mm-hmm. Amen. Can I get an amen? We have to be the voice, the grassroots effort to reach other moms and spread the awareness of this 911 emergency that we're faced with. Galatians 6:9 says, "Let us not become weary in doing good, for at the proper time we will reap a harvest if we don't give up." We'll enter the mental health mom. Advocate extraordinaire. Who will never give up. As a result of our experience, I have chosen to dedicate the rest of my natural born, God-given life to trying to make a difference by increasing awareness of the injustices that are happening in our minors in regards to their mental health.
Let me tell you, I'm like a dog with a bone right now. My goals are really simple. 3 of them. Increase awareness of non-invasive testing and treatment options that are available. You should know what you don't know before you make a decision on how to treat your child. Number 2, we got to get the insurance companies on board, and that's no easy task. That's not like a phone call. You know, I can't text message Blue Cross Blue Shield and tell them to get on board. That's no easy task. But it's going to happen. It's going to happen. Number 3, we got to lobby lawmakers, and of course all this stuff about insurance and medical stuff happens at the state level. So for us, that's in Austin. We got to lobby lawmakers to protect our minors. We have to make it required by law, which will require revamping all standard of care practices, retraining everybody, including teachers in our schools, but that we need to exhaust all non-invasive testing and treatment methods available before doctors are even authorized to write a prescription for these type of mind-altering drugs to minors. Prove that they have exhausted every resource available. You know, I've often said through some of the presentations that I've given that I wish that lawmakers and these insurance company reps, and these big pharma reps, had been living in my house during the years that my kids were medicated. They could sit around the dinner table with us. They could have dealt with my son when he was experiencing side effects of the medication that he didn't even need. Like when he was experiencing psychosis. Or when he came to me and begged me to take him to a treatment facility because he wanted to kill himself. I don't want the lawmakers and the insurance companies and big pharma. I wish they were sitting there when that happened. It's from a side effect of a med he didn't need. I mean, I would go something like, could you pass the salt? Oh, and can you please deal with my son who's currently seeing an illusion of a demon holding a bloody knife over his head? Gee, thanks. I mean, they should be sitting around the dinner table, right? They should see what everyday life was like for my kids as a result of their actions. Sorry, I'm fired up. I'll stop talking. All right, we know that's not going to happen. So I'm using my one solitary mama bear voice in a variety of ways. First of all, I'm shouting from the rooftops to anybody that will listen, even to some that don't want to listen. Get a brain map.
Yes.
That's it. Period. Next sentence. Mic drop. It gives you so much information. And when you get a QEEG, there you go, QEEG brain map, and you see the report, you're going to learn so much information. It's a great place to start. I've also set up a website, a Facebook page. My website is mentalhealthmom.life, not .com. mentalhealthmom.life. I've got business cards I'll give all y'all one, so you don't have to worry about writing all that down. I have a Facebook page. I'm connecting with so many people one-on-one through social media, just seeing their posts in some of these groups and asking them, how do you know your son has ADHD, and confirm the diagnosis with the brain map and what's a brain map. You know, so many of those. So many people have ended up, just like me, in front of Dr. Agnes with their kids as a result of the Mental Health Mom's efforts. Done some media, we've done some newspapers, we've been on the news, we've done some podcasts, called a lot of lawmakers. This last session in Austin, you all may or may not know, the bill failed, but there was a bill in front of our lawmakers to put psychiatrists in every school, public school. And if a teacher suspects your kid has ADHD, and they go to the psychiatrist, and the psychiatrist says that your kid has ADHD, and you don't medicate, the school bill will say yes. Wow. That was a bill in front of our lawmakers. Failed. I made a few calls on that. But you can call your lawmakers. That doesn't take any time. All the information about what bills are in session are always online. It's very easy to find. Make some calls. And then next year, this has been a health year for me. I've had 3 major surgeries in the last 6 months. So I haven't been able to travel much. But next year, come see me in Austin. Because I'm going to be lobbying live. You best believe it. You best believe it. I'm almost done, I promise. I promise nothing. Got 5 more minutes on the clock here. The other exciting thing is I'm some writing. I'm going to write a memoir about our story, starting with the adoption and everything that we've been through. And as I started writing the memoir, some ideas for some children's books came to me. You know, when the PMP Center said, hey, you need to go do neurofeedback and, you know, this brain mapping thing and all this stuff. Didn't know what it was. I looked for information to go over with my kids online, right, before we went. My son Alex does have high functioning autism, so he needs to know ahead of time, a few times, what's going to happen. And all I found were like videos of brain mapping from like the 70s. And I mean, it looked like a Frankenstein, like they were electrocuting him or something. Like, I'm not showing my kids that. So I've actually created a character, and I'm writing a series of children's books. And my little animated character's name is Dr. A. Because Dr. A saved my kid's life. And the tagline is, hey Dr. A, help save the day, what in the world is ... And the first two books is what in the world is brain mapping, and what in the world is neurofeedback. And that character could be applied to anything. What in the world is talk therapy, what in the world is play therapy, what in the world is ADHD, what in the world, I mean, the possibilities are endless. For this little character to help kids deal with these big issues in the mental health world. So stay tuned. If I get invited back next year, hopefully I'll have them and they'll be published. I invite you to join me. I invite you guys to join me in this effort. And you don't have to go crazy like me. I mean, you don't have to talk in front of people. Some people don't like that. Ironically, it's been a passion of mine. The lady sitting in the back was my high school speech coach. Took my very first speech class. I won't say how many years ago, but it's been a minute. It's been a minute. You don't have to go crazy. You can start small. If you're a therapist, you can talk to your patients about brain mapping. Or you can form a relationship with a nearby neurofeedback center. Go see what it's all about. Our therapist that sees the boys and me, we all three see the same therapist, I introduced you to the people at Sandstone. And now they have garnished a wonderful mutual referral relationship, right? Because a lot of kids could benefit from brain mapping and neurofeedback, and a lot of their kids that come to them first could really benefit from therapy. Beautiful relationship they've formed. As parents, you can have your child that you think, or your niece, or your next door neighbor, whatever. Have a brain map. Talk to somebody you know who's struggling with their child's behavior, and tell them what you learned today. Take some extra cards of mine and pass them along to people who are struggling. You can research. You can learn what you don't know. Go ahead.
Some of these children are young adults now.
Yes, they are.
Most of the therapies are for children. So where can they go?
I'll tell you, my son also went to Sandstone. My son's a senior in college, and last year took a semester off and did this type of brain mapping. And it is not something that is just something for children. It is also something that anybody, so moms that are struggling, family members that are struggling, her story is with children. My story is with my son, but he's 22.
Well, I understand, but I checked before for adults. Many of these facilities don't take adults. That is the problem.
Are you talking about brain mapping facilities, neurofeedback facilities?
Yeah, the ones that I haven't researched in the last couple of years, but when my daughter was, struggling, I have looked around and.
Well, I can tell you, I don't mean to make it sound like it's such a simple answer, because I know none of this is simple. But I know that there are places that do. Sandstone's a great example. When my boys were going through, they did 60 sessions each. And so I would, sit there and I made the best friends with the Olympic softball team, women's softball team, because they were doing neurofeedback for competitive edge and to learn about how each other and how people who are typically catchers think and they're typically pitchers think. And, they're all adults. It's fascinating. So I know that there are places, and certainly, talk to these guys at break when you're moseying around the tables, and I'm sure that they can help get you in the right direction. Well, guys, in closing, I know that this topic is tough stuff. I mean, it just is, period. It's not fun to talk about. I truly hope I was able to shed some light on the 911 level emergency that's going on with our miners all across the country. As an advocate, I am hanging on to Hebrews 6:11, which reminds us, we want each of you to show the same diligence to the very end, so that what you hope for may be fully realized. What I hope will be fully realized is an increase in awareness that we can do better for our children. Thank you so much for allowing me the honor and the privilege of sharing our story. Come find me before you leave today and make sure that you get a card. I would love for you to reach out with any questions. I talk to moms all over the country, and I hope to talk to each of you again in the near future. I think I have 5 more minutes left. Do we have time for any questions if there are any? Okay, a couple of minutes. If anybody has any questions, yes, ma'am.
You mentioned the questionnaire that your son had to complete in order to make the determination from a clinical perspective what they were diagnosing him with. You also mentioned that that questionnaire was something that was mandated by the insurance company. My question to you is, was the mandate from the insurance company specific to a certain insurance company, or was the mandate from a legislative perspective and the insurance companies were given the requirement to use the questionnaire?
My understanding, and I would research this, and I'd be happy to research it more and get back with you, but my understanding is that it was a legislative issue, because I was mad. And I asked, and they said that they had, your kid has to be at least 10, I was told, and it just shocked me. I wasn't there to have my kid find out about birds and bees. That wasn't why we were there.
So what's great from an advocacy perspective is that now, if the legislature was willing to develop or approve that questionnaire, why can't they approve a revised questionnaire that is specific to our adolescents, that says to these insurance companies, instead of using this format to make a determination and assessment, you're going to move forward with utilizing this format? And if that's the case, from an advocacy perspective, I think we all have a responsibility to step up and make
Absolutely.
sure that those types of legislative requirements are something that's taken seriously.
Absolutely. That was beautifully put. And you don't have to, we're also busy. I mean, that can be a call, it can be a letter, right? It can be signing some of these petitions that are going on change.org so that they get heard. But absolutely, I mean, it was mortifying. It was a mortifying experience because I was caught very off guard with that. And so was my son. Any other questions? Please go visit Sandstone. These guys are amazing people. They'll give you the big words and the fill-in stuff. I just don't know all that. But I know it worked and my kids are drug-free.